Okay, we are live in Montana, Thompson Falls, sitting next to Dan Evans on a podcast. What's up, Dan?
Never thought it would happen, did you?
6 years. I know I reached out the first year because I'm like, oh, I know Dan Evans. I'll get him on the pod. And that got shut down pretty fast.
It's been a while. Haven't gotten together for a long time.
You're doing great, man. You look healthy. Family is healthy. Everyone's growing up fast. Business is doing well. Nothing's really changed, man. You love elk hunting still.
Nothing's really changed. Nope, just older.
Yeah.
Yep, some things change, I've noticed, when you get old.
Yeah, no doubt. I think for me, getting you on today, everyone wants to hear about elk stories and stuff. And guys, we'll get you some maybe. But I want to get to know the real Dan Evans. So where were you born? Where were you raised?
Well, I was born in Ontario, Oregon, but my dad was a pastor all the time, so I was a preacher's kid. So we moved quite a bit. So basically, even though I was born in Oregon, the first 4 years of my life, we lived in Alaska. And I don't remember much of that, of course, since I was that age. But when I was 4, we moved back down and lived down near a little tiny town near Boise, Idaho, for a few years. And then I kind of consider my main growing up area as Salmon, Idaho. So that's where I know Jared Lyle from.
Now it's starting to make sense.
Jared and I went to grade school together in Salmon, and I lived there from the time I was 7 until I was 12.
Knowing how obnoxious, and I mean that in a complimentary way, Jared Lyle is as an adult male right now, like I give him a hard time. I'm like, I can't believe you're CEO, the way you behave. And he's going to listen to this. So, Jared, I love you, buddy. But how crazy was Jared growing up in grade school?
Well, it's funny because my family, nobody hunted in my family. And Jared's family hunted and trapped and everything. So I loved to be around that. So every chance I got, I would hang out at their place. And I can remember one little quick story about Jared. Of course, he grew up with that. And so his dad liked to trap. And I remember being over there one time and his dad wanted him to flesh out some hides. I think it was coyotes or something. And I was all about that. Oh, let's do it. And Jared, he wasn't too excited at all because, of course, he had to do that all the time.
That was a chore.
But, yeah, no, we came from kind of totally different family lifestyles. But Jared and I hit it off from the time we were young then. And then we kept in touch off and on after I moved away from there all the way through until I called him one day when I was with Trophy Taker. After the first few years, I was at a point where I needed some help. And so I called him and I said, hey, would you like to come work with me? So he worked with me for 14 years, and we've been great friends our whole life, basically. It's a great story when you can work with one of your best friends and come out of it being good friends at the end, too.
Amen to that. Yeah, you're right. Salmon's beautiful. How long did you stay in Salmon? Did you graduate high school there and everything?
No, I was only there till I was 12. And then we moved to Elgin, Oregon, and I lived there for a few years. And then moved up to Ione, Washington.
You lived in Ione?
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
So we lived there for a few years. So like I said, we moved around a lot.
My dad was a pastor.
Really?
Yeah, till I was 6. And then I think he was tired of us being dirt floor poor, and he's like, I'm going to get a real job. So I do remember a little bit of PK, pastor kid days, but it's tough. Yeah, you do have congregations and all the ins and outs of that, and people think maybe your parents are more strict than other parents, and they probably are. But all in all, it was good. It was good. But you didn't grow up in a hunting family. Do you think some of that time around Jared's family, like, planted a seed?
Well, it's interesting that I was always interested in it. I thought, coming from the background I did, you wouldn't think I would maybe get an interest, but I loved shooting bows from the time I was a little kid. My uncle gave me my first bow. It was just a recurve. I still have it upstairs, actually. And I can remember, going out behind the house and hiking around the fields and stuff with that bow. And years later, I went back to Salmon, and I stopped in at a little sporting goods store that I used to go to. And the lady working there still remembered me. She says, "Oh, you're the kid that always would ride his bike in here and buy one arrow." Every time I'd saved enough money for one arrow, I'd head to town and get one.
Really? That's great. I think Salmon is one of my favorite areas. Just it's beautiful. Um, Ione, Washington is probably not one of my favorite areas, but it's beautiful. You're right there. What is that? The what river runs through Ione there? Is it the Pend
The
Oreille?
Pend Oreille
Yeah.
up high, yeah.
Yeah, up high there, and it is still good country. I don't make it up there as much as I'd like to, but Washington's fine. Well, your family upbringing, nobody hunted. Nobody ate meat, I would assume, in your family either.
Nope, my family was vegetarian growing up. So my dad had eaten meat in his younger years, but at some point, I think when he was late teens or early 20s, he quit eating meat. And my mom was a vegetarian from the time they met. So I grew up vegetarian. I didn't actually start eating meat until I was in high school.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you have to like sneak eating meat, or is it?
Well, no, not really. I mean, I went to boarding school for high school, and so I was gone from home most of the time after my sophomore year. I actually took homeschool the first year because I was into training horses at that time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I actually got interested in horses to impress a girl that I liked, and she was really into horses. So I started getting into horses for that reason. But then
Did that work, by the way?
no, I ended up with the best girl for me though, so that worked out.
Yeah.
So, but no, but the horse thing kind of caught on to me for a while, and so I actually trained horses. That's how I earned money going through school. I did that for quite a few years, and actually trained horses full time for a couple years after college, even before
Okay.
I really kicked into anything else.
That makes sense. Man, your story kind of reminds me of one of my best friends. His name's Josh, and he's Seventh Day. His wife's a vegan or vegetarian, and he basically is also. But if he kills animals, he's a hunter. He'll eat that, but no one else in the family will touch it. And then his boy is in boarding school right now, and he's like I think a freshman, and it seems like maybe that's kind of like a general like parallel to you.
Well, that's my dad was a Seventh-day Adventist pastor.
Okay.
And so that's
That
what
makes
I've
sense.
grown up in, and that's why I went to boarding school, went to one of our church schools. And so yeah, and that's fairly common in our church. There's a lot of vegetarians, but there's a lot that aren't
Yeah.
too. It's not a church doctrine that you don't eat meat, but it is very prevalent.
No, that makes sense. Well, when did you decide, I guess, to go after archery a little more serious? Like, I mean, a recurve's one thing, but like at some point you got hooked into archery.
Well, when I lived in Elgin, Oregon from the time I was 12 until I was 15.
Mm-hmm.
And my neighbor was kind of a backyard archery dealer. Back then, there was quite a few of those. And so he didn't have an archery shop, but he had some kind of a system set up. And he's the first one that ever took me bow hunting. So he had a son that was my age, and they loaned me my first compound, really. It was a Martin Warthog. I don't know if you ever remember seeing those bows, but it had a wood handle. And so I borrowed that from him for a while, I think probably a year, and then I bought my first one through them. After I saved up money, I bought a Martin Tiger. But anyway, that neighbor, his name was Dale Thamert, and he took me hunting for the first time. And I guess that's where my trophy hunting mentality started, because I distinctly remember our first encounter where he actually called in a bull to me. And
How old are you at this point?
that would have been, I would have just taken my hunter safety and stuff. So I think I was 13 probably. It may have been the last year when I was 14. So 13 or 14. And anyway, when he called, there was a spike and a raghorn 5-point. And the spike came right in to within 10 yards. But the whole time, all I could think about was that 5-point. that was back there, and I just waited. Well, after it all blew up, I don't remember exactly how they spooked, but I remember him coming up to me and he goes, "What's the deal? You had that bull right there." And I'm like, "Yeah, but there was a 5-point back there." "Who cares?" he said.
Yeah, dude, you deserved that. But that's why you hunt, and that's why I hunt. We all hunt for different ways and different things, and obviously, even right now, present, you and I, a bull you wouldn't even look twice at is definitely probably a bull I'm gonna like maybe go after. It's just a different deal, but it's still cool that we like hunting.
Yeah.
You know?
No, we all got to hunt for our own reasons. I don't think it never should be that we all fit in the same mold. It's whatever you're after, and I've hunted for the most part all these years the way I like to hunt and the way I feel like I would hunt, whether anybody knew about it or not.
Yeah.
And that's worked well for me. But I mean, I know it's easy to get caught up in letting other reasons enter into your equation, but that's the way I think it should be. Hunt the way you want to hunt. Don't worry about what else or what anybody else thinks.
Yeah. That's interesting. I do think we'll come back to that a little bit as far as the bravado and the ego in hunting, because your resume is pretty deep on killing big bulls. But if you hung around, Dan, I mean, you're the last one. You're a very humble guy, I guess is my point of that, which I really respect. Anyone who was ever coming up to me and showing me something uninitiated on their phone, I just remember when iPhones came out and ATA shows like, look at this, look at this. Like, I don't know. I'm so, like, that is, I just have a bad taste in my mouth. But if there's someone like you where I got to, like, basically beg you to show me a picture and you're like, okay, that's the best. When they're like, you're just humble about it, you're modest, and there's not enough of that right now.
I didn't really realize you were supposed to take hunting pictures to trade shows, but I did figure out that was expected by a lot of people, I guess. But I used my hunting for promotion of my products because obviously I got into that business. So I did take my hunting photos to trade shows. Usually they were on my graphics and stuff, Yeah. But yeah, I've never looked at it as a competition against other people. I think hunting it's a personal thing. I mean, I have seen a lot of people kind of make it into a competition, it seems like, but boy, it'll humble you in a hurry. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you get caught up in it, I've put a lot of pressure on myself sometimes just by setting my standards a certain place or realizing that my standards are unrealistic for where I'm hunting, and it can get disappointing in a hurry, So I don't know. For me, I try to keep the bottom line as enjoying the hunt for what I like out of it. And it doesn't have to be what somebody else likes out of it.
The reason why I do think you're arguably one of the best elk hunters I know is because you've averaged 50 days in the field for 30 years straight.
Yeah, it's been a lot of days, and that's what people don't see, of course. I don't feel like I have a set of skills that are way better than everybody else. I feel like I've had a set of circumstances and combined with skills that has worked out well. I feel like there's a lot of people out there that if they had had the same opportunities I've had, well, they'd have a trophy room that looked probably better than mine, So I've been very blessed to be able to spend a lot of time and a lot of money over the years. I mean, hunting, the first 10 years or so that I hunted, I didn't have hardly any extra money, but I spent a lot of time. And the last 20 years or so, I've had more money I could spend, and I've still spent the time. So that's a big combination. But as you've seen too, you meet a lot of people, because there's a lot of people that have big dreams from especially elk hunting. But I've seen a lot of times over the years where there's good hunters and they get a lot of opportunities, but they don't put the effort in to learn to shoot well enough to capitalize on them. And then there's guys that are great shots. They put a lot of time into shooting, but they don't know how to hunt. They don't get opportunities because they don't have a good shot. They don't have a good, plan and system. Well, if you can put both of those together and be a fairly good shot and know your equipment, and then if you can learn the hunting end of it. I didn't have anybody teaching me, so I had to spend a lot of time. But you can also do it other ways. You can pay to go with somebody that knows what they're doing. You can go hunt with a good outfitter, and that's going to shortcut your learning curve for sure. I never really did that, so I had to put that much time in.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you and I have always kind of had this bond, is that I knew you right in the middle of my elk hunting learning curve is when I first met you. And I was hunting country that you no longer had hunted. You had graduated, as I call it.
Graduated.
You just got smart. But I was hunting, that thick, nasty, steep, deep North Idaho country. And I was always picking your brain. Always. If you don't remember, I can remind.
Yeah.
I'm always hounding you for, I wouldn't say like, hey, where should I go? But like, how should I hunt these elk?
Yeah.
I need tactics. And you were always super encouraging and motivating to me. Just if I talk to you, just put that spark, that fire to keep after it, not give up. And I was like you. I had a lot of time in the field. Like, didn't have a lot of money. It was expensive to buy an out-of-state tag, but I had the time. I mean, I would quit jobs for elk hunting.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the killer for me. But North Idaho was training grounds. And you've said the same thing earlier today. Like, that was your training grounds.
Yeah.
What is it about the place?
Well, that was just where I was. That was the first place that I started finding elk, because of where I lived close by. So I remember the first time going on a little scouting trip back into northern Idaho, and a friend of mine and I were way back in on these roads. We were pretty much lost. And I spotted a great bull. I mean, one of the best bulls I had ever seen at that point. And I thought, man, I've got a hunt in here. Well, the next year I ended up getting an Idaho tag, and I had never killed a bull at that time. So this was 1992, and I went to find that same place, which of course this was way pre-GPS days and stuff. So I went to find that same place, and I went to go up the road that we had gotten in there, and it was gated because it went through some timber company land, I guess. And so I spent a bunch of time trying to figure out how to get in there, and I ended up having to backpack back in to get to the area where I'd seen that bull. Long story short, I did end up killing a bull that year at about 5 or 6 steps in the alder brush. And when I walked up to that bull, I do remember, though, getting terribly rattled on that first bull. I still remember coming to full draw. Of course, I was shooting fingers with a compound. And when I came to full draw, I suddenly realized that I was anchored up here by my eye like a traditional shooter, which is not the way I was normally.
Uh-oh.
Normally I would anchor, but I realized it before I shot. At that distance, it may have worked anyway, but I still remember thinking, wow, this is really rattling me, And then when I walked up to the bull after I killed him, I was by myself, and I remember thinking, man, this is what I like to do.
Yep.
So he was a little over 300-inch 6-point, really nice bull, and I was hooked.
So
right
it
then.
begins.
So it began, yep.
Yeah, you did catch some of that North Idaho heyday, hunted it for 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
When, along those 10 years, and I'm staring at your best Idaho bull right now, North Idaho bull, and
yep.
He's a dandy. When did you figure out how to make an archery rest?
Well, I designed the first rest basically because I had had problems with other rests on the market. So I took engineering in school, in college, but I took civil engineering. Didn't have a lot to do with product design, but I was always interested in design, and I had a couple of arrow rests break on me at inopportune times, not hunting, but actually just shooting. And I started looking at some of the rests that I had been using, and I thought, man, they're using awful small screws to hold important components together and things. And then I started playing with fall-away type rests. Now, I can't take credit for the fall-away design because there had been fall-away rests before, but nobody had ever built a good one. So there weren't any on the market currently when I started working on my first design. Anyway, and I had seen there was a couple other people. Glenn Berry, he was shooting a fall away rest. I think he was the first one I ever saw it on somebody's bow. And he was just taking a Golden Key TM Hunter rest and reversing the spring so that it would pull up, connected to the cable on the bow. So I thought, well, that's an interesting concept. So I started modifying rests and shooting. But then I was thinking the same thing, the durability issues. So that's when I actually just sat down. I had just gotten married. Karen and I got married in the spring of '97. And we bought a little house over by DeBorgia, Montana, just over the pass over here. And I started just drawing arrow rest ideas because I wanted to make a better. At first, I was going to just make a kit to modify an existing rest on the market.
Yep.
But then I got to thinking, well, why would I do that? Just make a kit for that rest. Let's just see if I can just make a whole rest. So anyway, long story short, I got it designed up, drawn up the way I thought it would work that winter. And I approached a machine shop and made a first prototype. If I remember right, I think I spent $700 or $800 to make this prototype, and it didn't work.
Oh, no.
But that's fine. It gave me an idea of what I was doing. And it wasn't long till I did have it where it worked. And Karen and I scraped together all the money we could, and we made 200 arrow rests.
You gambled.
We did.
You bet on yourself.
Yeah, I want to say it cost us about $6,000, I think. And anyway, make a long story short, it took me most of 2 years to give away and sell those first 200 arrow rests. But it started to catch on. I was shooting 3D quite a bit, and Karen was too, and we were doing well and traveling to a lot of shoots. And so we would show up and do well and get to know people, and people would notice this on my bow. And so I'd start talking to them. They'd be like, oh, well, man, maybe we would try that or whatever. So I did give away the biggest percentage of those first 200, but in 2000 was the first year that it was my full-time business.
Wow.
So
what was your side hustle? I mean, obviously the rest was your side hustle, but what were you doing for real work to bring in income?
Well, after school, I actually worked for a little while at the Outdoor Sportsman. Josh Jones' dad, Mark Jones, owned that in Spokane, and I worked there for a little while in between things. And then when Karen and I got married and moved over to DeBorgia, we actually both were working a little bit for a phone company. And she was more than I was. And then her parents actually helped us be able to buy our first little house.
Yeah.
And it needed some serious work. And so then I ended up fixing up the house as kind of the project for the next little while. And that's when I designed the rest.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really have another full-time job in between. And then when we sold the first rests, I started getting big ideas, and I thought, well, maybe I can make something go on this, and then so 2000 was the first year that it actually was a full-time where I actually made an income off of it. And then the business tripled year over year for the next 3 years in a row. And 2002 is when I hired Jared.
You called Jared.
Yeah. And so
J-Dog, I need you. And you know what? Jared is really good at business. I blown away at how smart he is.
Oh yeah.
When it comes to business, that was a good hire. Yeah, he's a sharp
Well,
guy.
he already knew some things on the business end, and then he and I learned some things together as we went through it for the year over the 14 years for sure. So it was quite the
14-year run.
Yeah, 14 years. And then in 2016, I decided to finally take an offer from an investment group that there had been several of them knocking on the door. There was a lot of that going on in the archery industry at that time. So I finally decided to sell, and it worked out well for Jared too, because at the same time he got the offer to go to Huntin' Fool.
Mm-hmm.
And so it worked out well without me needing to, I didn't want to leave him high and dry either. So it worked out great to have that timing of when his job came. And then I think that's worked out well for him.
Oh,
too.
yeah, he's killing it. He's got an awesome team. And so in 14 years of running a rest company, you'd mentioned earlier today, you were like, just kind of a knuckle dragger in the beginning, but really adapting and learning and understanding, like studying the top line, not the bottom line in the rest business. And money was coming in, and that's great, and we're doing. But man, you had a ton of overhead. You had spent a lot on marketing and R&D and
Yeah.
all the stuff, and that stuff's tough to learn through reading or a class in college.
It is. Jared had taken more business stuff in school, so he did know more about the business end of things than I did, and I was learning as I went. But yeah, so we learned a lot through through the years. But yeah, the basic thing I learned is the bottom line is what matters much more than the top line when it comes to running a business. And if you, it doesn't really matter how much money you have coming in, it's how much you have at the end.
Yeah.
After all the expenses.
And I understand. I mean, I've experienced that. I'm not a very good business guy, but I've been self-employed for so long that I think I've gotten lucky, to be honest with you. I'm not really strategic when it comes to a business plan and all this stuff, but bottom lines are important. But in your neck of the woods, in your space, like there's a lot of stressors too. Like in the archery industry, like somebody's always suing somebody about some patent. You copied me, copied that. Did you have any confrontations? Anybody coming after you? Did you have to go after anyone when it came to that end of the business?
Well, I did have some. I never have sued anybody over anything involved in the business, but I've been sued. There was a big lawsuit. There was a guy that thought that he had a patent that covered all followays, basically, which it didn't. And I kind of blew it off at the first, knowing now the first time he got a hold of me, he said, "Hey, I've got your arrow rest on my backup bow, and it works just like the one that I have a patent applied for on." Well, this was clear back in the early days when I also had a patent applied for at the same time. And so he's like, "I just wanted to see if you got yours protected, whatever." And I said, "Yeah, I do." And that was it. And I'm thinking, he's got my rest on his backup bow. I mean, this guy, how serious is this guy, Well, come to find out, as it got down a few years later, he actually found an attorney that took it on some kind of a contingency plan. I don't know what the deal was, but he filed suits against at that time. Back up just a little bit. When I first introduced it, there weren't other rests on the market, other follow-away rests.
Right.
But I did not have a strong patent on it. And like I said, the follow-away concept had been done before, so I couldn't patent the follow-away concept, the way it worked. I just patented my design, and it was a very narrow patent. So over the first few years, when it started doing well, other companies started building their version, of course. And so by the time this guy came and filed a lawsuit, there was a lot of followaways on the market. So he didn't just sue me, he sued all these other companies.
All y'all.
But there's where I learned another lesson. Since all these other companies most of them had built copies of my rest. Not all of them. There was a few. QAD, I think, was one. They did their own thing. That was not a copy of my rest. But pretty much a bunch of the other ones were copies of my rest. And so I wasn't happy about that. So I did not want to join forces with all of them to fight this guy on this lawsuit. So I chose to fight it on my own, and they all joined forces, which was smart. Looking back at it, now I should have joined.
Yeah.
At the end of the lawsuit, I had spent $500,000 on representation, and I think they, as a group, had spent a little more than that, but it was split up 12 ways. So,
oh, man.
So that was a lesson I learned.
That's a fun lesson.
We did win. It basically got to the summary judgment stage, and they threw it out. Basically, they said that their patent was not valid. It got to the point where they ran out of money anyway. But I learned a big lesson on that it's better to join forces with somebody that you're not necessarily on the same page with sometimes to share expenses when it comes down to it.
Yeah, man, that's tough. So I've sold a couple businesses, nothing like Trophy Taker. That's your baby, dude. Was it hard to sell, or was it tell me about the emotion involved in the sell. Like you had built this thing up from the ground.
Well, it was a little different though in my case, because at first I was not going to sell it. until it came up when we were already kind of in negotiations, and it came up to the point, and the company I worked with was actually very good to work with. I mean, they did everything they said they would do. After some of the stories I had heard in the industry, I was paranoid,
Yeah, I would be.
but they were actually good to work with. But when we got down to the bottom line, they said, well, we'll pay this much. And I'm like, I'm not going to sell it for that much. But then they said, well, here's the deal. We're just basing things on sales, the last 3 years of sales. So you have some new products that you've just designed. I had just introduced the option sight and the quivalizer. Well, the first year that I introduced those products, I didn't make any profit on them, really.
Yeah.
So they're looking at the numbers, and they're saying, well, these products aren't making any money. These products are. You can keep the products that aren't making money if you want. And I said, oh, really? So you're willing to pay the same amount, and I keep the option sight and the quivalizer? And they said, yeah. I said, okay, now I'm interested.
That's so, yeah, no one knows that. That's so cool to hear.
So it
that.
wasn't quite like giving up my whole baby, as you say.
Yeah.
I mean, the Trophy Taker brand was, of course, my brand.
It still is. In my mind, it's you with the bull as the logo.
But I kept the products I was most excited about at that time. So, the Arrow Rest I'd had for a long time, and there wasn't a lot setting it apart from what was out there otherwise.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you look around at the rests, even a lot of them that are still around now, and what do they look like? Well, that's what they look like. And that's fine. I mean, I guess they say flattery is how do they say it? Is the best compliment or something. Anyway.
Imitation.
Oh, yeah, imitation. Yeah, okay. Well, anyway, so because I was keeping my new designs that I had patents pending on and that I was really excited about, and then since that time, I actually had patents issued that are very strong patents. On the option sight, I've got a patent that covers removing pins from your view, basically.
Yep.
So, there's no other products on the market that work like that give you that option. And same thing on the quivalizer. I've got a patent on basically combining a quiver with a stabilizer on the front of your bow like that. And so there's no other products like that on the market either. So that is where Option Archery started. So I didn't feel like it wasn't like I was jumping out of the whole market,
Yeah, and that's the truth. You weren't. You got to do the more exciting part.
Well, yeah. I mean, I signed a non-compete when I sold, but the non-compete was only for arrow rests and broadheads. Mm-hmm. Which didn't limit me.
And it had a sunset, so that's pretty exciting. And that thing expired recently. That's cool to hear. Let's talk about Option Archery. The quivalizer, definitely, guys, check that out. Dan runs it, and we got a train in the house. But I would say that the Canyon Pounder is what I really wanted to kind of chat about a little bit, and then obviously finish with some elk tactics. You sent me this site a while ago, and then I knew it was going to be a candidate for me for elk hunting. I'd hunted with a 2-pin vertical last year. Loved the sight picture. Kind of went from a fast eddy to a black gold dual track. And I just really like that platform, but it does not bode well for elk hunting, where elk decide to step out when they decide to step out. Right. And you could get busted ranging, adjusting, sliding, whatever, already be at full draw. They come in, but you don't get the shot, and they run out and stop at a certain distance that you ain't got a pen for. I think you know that. You've killed over 40 elk, over 25 bulls over 350 inches, all of them like public land self-guided. The dude is, like I said, you're one of the best elk hunters that I know. It's not going to work for me. So I knew I had to come back to my roots, 4 or 5 pen. And I talked to you, and you're like, dude, I think you really need to look at this Canyon Pounder. And I was like, what did you call it? And you're like, the Canyon Pounder. What a name.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, Jared and I used to sit around and talk about ideas for product names and stuff. And, of course, Jared, I'll turn my phone off.
Oh, no. Keep it on.
Or is that your phone?
That's you. Or is that you?
That's me.
Okay.
Let me silence it here. There we go. Anyway, we used to always get a kick out of throwing around ideas for names. And for some reason, I've always enjoyed names that can be taken wrong or can be had fun with,
Yeah.
which is fine. But, I mean, the big thing with the Canyon Pounder, obviously, it's more of a term used in long-range rifle.
Yeah.
And this is probably a good place to say, because I get messages all the time and comments on posts and stuff of people that think that I'm promoting long-range hunting, which is not true. I'm promoting long-range practicing, and that's what I believe in. I believe in practicing at twice the range, or even more than twice the range of what you're going to hunt.
100%.
Yeah. So the Canyon Pounder is for exactly how it sounds, for long bombs for practice.
Yep.
And there may be times where you need it for a follow-up shot in hunting too. But from a hunting point of view, that's where, personal ethics need to govern what you're going to take on shots. You need to not take shots that you're not 100% confident in. And there's a lot of variables that enter. So shooting at game at the ranges that we're practicing is not practical in pretty much any scenario.
I've done 25-something ELKSHAPE camps in the last 5 years, and I said this on my last podcast. I'm going to briefly just cover it because it applies to what you're saying. We have them tell us their effective range, like their maximum range that they're willing to shoot on an elk. And then when we first get to camp, we don't even know them. There's 30 to 50 of them. We're like, grab your bow, grab an arrow. I got it all printed out. I'm like, all right, Dan Evans, you said your maximum effective range was 75 yards. Step out to 75 and put one in the 10 ring.
Yeah.
And they got to do it in front of me, Joel, all the instructors, and 30 campers, and we make a half circle around them. I do it on purpose because I've bet 10% actually hit what they thought was their effective range. And it's a stressful situation, right? Your perception is that, everyone's watching. And, so I do think a lot of people need to understand that if you want to extend your effective range, truly, you have to practice. I love shooting. Honestly, Dan, I like shooting as far as I can actually shoot. I've shot a target at 300 yards on YouTube. But, 100-plus yard shots, 120-yard shots, I'm never going to take those on an animal. But that sure makes 60 seem like a chip shot, which is crazy, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly true. I mean, at any time we feel pressure, I always think, at least for myself, whenever I am feeling the pressure, really pressured, it cuts the effective distance in half at least.
Shrinks it.
Yeah, and I feel pressure just like anybody else does, I mean, even hunting, when I'm in hunting situations, it's probably a good thing I'm the only one there usually, because otherwise everybody would know that I was shaking too, But you have to learn to be able to control that, and that, I know you guys work on in your camps and stuff, and with Joel Turner on the executing the shot. So I find when I'm nervous, whether it's shooting in front of somebody or whether it's hunting, I shake, a little bit. So, but I can still execute a clean shot, but I'm not going to be able to shoot as tight if I'm shaking. And then I've also noticed I tend to do that a little more as I've gotten older too. I think there's a reason why they set the 50-year cutoff for the senior class.
Yeah. Well, I do think the Canyon Pounder, I'm going to give it a go. I have it on a bow that I can consider elk hunting, and it just makes a lot of sense. And if you guys listening to this podcast, we are making the dopest YouTube video. Clem over here is going to edit it, and it's a day in a life with Dan, and we have him break down every little thing on this site that he designed here in Montana. So be sure I'll leave a link in this to check out that video and see for yourself. It's pretty cool. But speaking of shaking, you said you had about a target panic.
Yeah.
And you used to use handhelds, and now you've moved on. You still could use a handheld, but you're like, I don't compete anymore. I'm going to use the release aid that I use hunting year round. But take us through how you not conquered, that's not the right word. How you mitigated that target panic? What year did it sneak up on you, man?
Yeah, well, I started shooting 3D in the mid 90s. And the first year I went back to the IBO World Championships was 96. Pretty sure, if I remember right. Well, by 97, my target panic was starting to get the better of me enough. And for everybody that has fought with it, you know that you'll hit a point where pretty soon you realize that you're not in control anymore. And so it got to the point where I couldn't even get my finger on the trigger. So my finger would either be behind the trigger, or I would try to work myself through it. So I would lay my finger on the trigger, have my wife standing there hollering at me in my face, trying to get things like I see Joel Turner doing.
Really?
And anyway, I was really having problems, especially whenever I'd go to a shoot or whatever. And I was still doing well at the shoots, but I knew in my head it was catching up with me. And I was getting to the point where I was shooting when it wasn't before the pin. I was past shooting, basically. So I'd have the pin going past and then punch it as it was going past what I wanted to hit. And I actually shot pretty well doing it for quite a while, but I knew it was catching me. So that winter I thought, man, I've got to do something about this or I'm not going to have any fun shooting anymore at all.